Welcome back to another episode of Family Vacation. I'm your host, AJ Tsanari. Last week, Matt took a look at Hiatus Coyote's newest output, Love Heart Cheat Code. If you haven't listened, go check it out. This week, we're going to be doing things a little differently. I've been kind of busy these past couple weeks, and I didn't really make time to script out a traditional script for my newest review. So we're going to go for a bit of a family meeting style, as I talk track by track of Magdalena Bay's newest album, Imaginal Disk. Imaginal Disk was released August 23rd, 2024 on Mom and Pop Records, and it is the sophomore album of synth-pop duo Magdalena Bay. Now, we've talked about this group before during Season 2, where we discussed their acclaimed debut, Mercurial World, but this album actually sees the band trying to move forward from that album, literally ending the loop from Mercurial World during this album's closer. And this album is also very ambitious in its concept, as it tells a bit of a story. As of now, we don't have all the pieces, as there are still more music videos in the work, but the groundwork for what this album is about is pretty cool and very out there. It's about the protagonist, True Blue, discovering what it means to be human by becoming her true self and learning all the obstacles that come with it. I really appreciate how the duo left a lot of the story beats up to interpretation through the lyrics and the other media they supplied the fans with. On top of the music, they also added a bunch of Easter eggs and breadcrumb trails on their interactive website, and then the music videos were also very instrumental at constructing the main narrative. This practice really lets the fans get involved and come up with their own theories around what's going on in the world of this album. And the concept itself is also very out there while being extremely relatable, which we'll dive into a little more as we go through these tracks. And I'm very glad groups like Magdalena Bay exist and try these super out there, super ambitious concepts that directly engages with the fans and encourages them to kind of play along. It's a very awesome practice that I'd really like to see with more groups. I know King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is another one that really kind of gets involved with their fan base with these very creative and out there worlds. But that's enough about the concept, let's just dive right into these tracks. We open up with She Looked Like Me, which serves as the overture and a bookend for this album. We're introduced to the world and protagonist of Imaginal Disk as we learn about her life through important events. The different sections this song goes through are very interesting and set the tone of this album very well, as the group is very much trying new things all across this project. She Looked Like Me is basically an opening musical number that goes from piano ballad to triumphant chant to dreamy synth pop to back to the chant. And it also introduces the concept of the other self our protagonist strives to be. A lot happens in this track, and it all flows into each other beautifully, naturally progressing from beat to beat with these grandiose instrumentals, the standout of course being those horns during the chant part. And Mika also shows off her range greatly in this track, sounding very wistful and longing in the opening, before her world is shattered and she just explodes with emotion during the outro. She Looked Like Me is definitely a great start to this ambitious concept. And it's followed up by one of my favorite tracks personally, Killing Time. Killing Time is all about complacency. We see the protagonist upset with her situation in life, just waiting for a change to happen, before realizing the change only happens through direct action and not just waiting for it. And the music balances these mindsets greatly. It's built around this groovy shuffle with a nice accented bass line and these very chill, beautiful Rhodes keys. But slowly, in a way that reminds me of Happy Colored Marbles by Ween, the track gets a little more twisted, with these distorted guitars occasionally screaming through the channels, eventually resulting in a full-on breakdown during the end. Mika's vocals get all distorted, the music just gets really heavy, and everything feels like it's falling apart, as the protagonist's frustration with their situation is finally realized, and she makes the change to do something about it. Killing Time is such a great track from a narrative and listening standpoint, as it's built up and foreshadowed so well while also just grooving on its own. There's also an awesome guitar solo that happens right after the second chorus, which really bridges the gap between both sections very well. And those triplet accented keys at the end rip very hard. Definitely a highlight for me all across the board. True Blue Interlude is another narrative track as we're introduced to the Imaginal Disk itself. It's basically a parody of self-help motivational tapes from the 80s and 90s, being built around this chill wave Muzak instrumentals, and the vocals basically being a spoken word advertisement for the Imaginal Disk procedure. And now this procedure basically involves getting a disc implanted in your brain that allows you to become your ideal self in a very shortcut-esque way. I also really love during the middle of this track where the spoken word section gets all grovelly and low-pitched and weird, kind of like in medication commercials when the negative side effects are just read really fast. It's not the best track on the album, but it's certainly a vibe and it sets up the rest of the album's narrative very well. Next up, we got the first two singles released for this album, Image and Death and Romance. Both of these songs are fantastic, they're some of my favorites on the album. Image is an almost house club track that's split into two halves as well, with the verses being built around these ominous oscillating keys and hypnotic vocals, persuading True Blue to go through the procedure. And then the choruses are just selling how confident and sexy you'll feel after the procedure, with this tight-ass bass line, high-pitched whistling keys, and very intimate, breathy backup vocals. And Mika's vocal delivery on the choruses are just so confident. It just embodies the attitude of feeling yourself. And then the 22 more minutes line is just such a brain-scratchy hook. Everything about this track just sells confidence, with the instrumentals sounding super funky and intimate, backed by Mika really selling the beauty of changing yourself to fit societal standards. It's a very brilliant track with some great commentary. Then, Death and Romance might be my favorite track on the entire album. I love this track musically so much. The beat is so goddamn funky with its awesome accented syncopation. The keys are beautiful and powerful, conveying this groovy sense of longing, and then the bass line just fucks, sliding and accenting every 2 beats during the verses, and then just going absolutely crazy during the choruses. And then Mika's vocals are just kinda crazy on this track. I love how she kind of uses her higher register on the pre-choruses during the my hands, your hands part, and then the way they just sound so echoey and powerful during the verses really adds to the sense of trying to keep a doomed relationship alive. It's like you're crying out for help, and it's achieved very well. The bridge also is fucking insane, with the added fluttering keys panning through the channels, the bass line getting more freedom to groove along, and of course the bell of the ride symbol carrying the beat all across. I adore this track. It's just constructed so well, and was a brilliant choice to get people excited for this album as the lead single. Now, as we approach the middle of this album, this is kind of where my problems with Imaginal Disk mostly lie. The run from Fierce Sex to Watching TV is a little lackluster. Like, Fierce Sex is an epilogue to Death and Romance that has some nice crunchy synths, a really beautiful shamisen riff, and a stimming vocal syncopation towards the outro, but it's mostly just a transition song more than anything. Then Vampire in the Corner might be my least favorite track on the album. I think it's solid enough, but I'm not really sure if it fits the overall sound of Imaginal Disk. It's very bare instrumentally, being built primarily around Mika's vocals, but it continues to build and build, adding more and more instrumentals before just exploding at the end like a lot of other tracks on this album. There's a really fun accented synth riff that happens about halfway through, and then Mika absolutely shreds during the last chorus, screaming out quite beautifully about how she still wants this person who was described in Death and Romance. It's a very nice track for Mika to shine, but it's a little silly instrumentally and not the most engaging either. Watching TV is very solid though, as it basically sees the protagonist discovering, confronting, and embracing the ugly sides of herself, with some very gruesome imagery to visually represent this. It also builds really well, going from this chill, lackadaisical groove with quirky synths and laid-back bass lines, before exploding with Mika using her high register to cry out with realization after she's confronted with her demons. All the sections in this track are done really well, and it's one of the most engaging moments on this album. And so ends the weakest run of tracks on this album. Now, if the only issues that I have is that one of the tracks doesn't really fit musically and kinda slows the pacing, then I think we're on track for a pretty good album. We begin the back half of this album with Tunnel Vision, which definitely grew on me as a single, as it's the moment of clarity and the start of True Blue making a change. It's one of the most gentle moments on the album, but the proggy instrumental outro with shrieking guitars and chugging bass lines is a highlight all across Imaginal Disk. Love Is Everywhere I really enjoy as a little disco track with a deep-ass bass line and tongue-in-cheek vocals, and that section during the second verse with those accented keys and dueling voices is a really cool moment that shows like some conflict within the characters. Then That's My Floor just kinda serves, as it shows what happens when you embrace your flaws too much and let them overcome you. It sees the group leaning more into their rock influences, especially during the choruses, which are so catchy and hard-hitting with those guitars. The use of harpsichord on this track is also very much appreciated, and the bass absolutely shreds on this track, and the guitar has an excellent guitar solo at the end. It's so crunchy, very reminiscent of like Piss Up a Rope by Ween. Just the tone is so crazy, I love it. Cry For Me is the climax of the album, and it's such a great moment. It's been described as being from the point of view of a villain, and you can tell. It's basically the culmination of everything on this album, sounding like a confrontation and the acceptance that things are over. Musically, it's a disco track, heavily inspired by ABBA, and it absolutely fucks. The use of strings and piano on this track really make it soar, especially during the outro when the narrator begs to listen to Remember Them in Death, and then they just kind of mimic Mika's frenzied delivery as she just cries out in desperation during her last moments. Oh yeah, and surprise surprise, the bass line fucks too on a disco track. After that, we have Angel on a Satellite, which is a really nice ballad, probably the other most gentle moment on this album, but it's solid for what it is. Not a favorite, but I think it's a nice penultimate way to kind of come down from everything and set the tone of the story at an end as we reach the true closer, the Ballad of Matt and Mika, which is a really nice bookend that utilizes lyrical and musical elements from She Looked at Me in such a satisfying way that also celebrates the duo's accomplishment as artists. It's just a really nice culmination of both Magdalena Bay and the Imaginal Disk story. I think it works really well and it's very satisfying. So overall, I think Imaginal Disk is very well done. With such an engaging concept explored in this unique way, backed up by some very interesting explorations of new genres, this album will definitely stick with you. I respect Matt and Mika swinging for the fences and just trying whatever they thought would be interesting. Now, while some of these attempts don't exactly fit the overall tone and sound of this album, I'm glad they tried because it led to some interesting experiments that they could polish in the future. So I'm going to give Imaginal Disk a solid A tier, a very worthy follow-up that avoids the sophomore slump, and I'm very excited to see where they go next. That'll do it for this week's episode of Family Vacation. Have you listened to Imaginal Disk? What did you think? Feel free to let us know. As always, I'm your host AJ Tenari. Thank you all for your constant love and support, and Matt, we'll see you next week.